Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. We are talking about feedback again, so leave a like on this video if you could. And let's dive in. So here's a recap of our framework that we went through last time. So I wonder if you can remember for yourself what are the 4 levels of feedback from beginner to advanced and what do they mean. So you'll have your thinking timer coming up now, and here are some of your hints. There you go, final answers. So if you had affirm at the top, you're right, don't praise, because praise renders feedback useless or negative. Correct and direct for the second one, telling them what to improve, which is based on success criteria, which is what today's video is about. And point at the process, their underlying thinking, a generalized strategy that's transferable between lots of topics. And coach, teaching an advanced student to self-reflect. So check out the previous video here if you want a recap on our framework. So today we're talking about learning goals and success criteria, and success criteria are the statements that describe for students what success looks like and the steps towards that success as well. Maybe not the official definition, but I like to think of the learning goal as the what. For example, describing how human activity can affect erosion, and the leveled success criteria as the how. What are the steps to achieving that goal, and what will success look like? So why use learning goals and success criteria? It's all about this quote from Dylan William, because feedback without success criteria can be arbitrary to students. They can't self-assess and be self-directed and self-motivated learners without success criteria. So it is the first step in putting more of the empowerment into their hands and releasing more of the work and the effort from our end and actually putting it where it belongs, on the students, in their responsibility for their own learning. They can't be independent learners if they don't know where they're going or how they're meant to achieve it. And this thought, similar again, the more the student is aware of the criteria for success, the more they can see the specific actions that are needed to attain it. So it empowers them to take the steps necessary in their own learning. So some of the benefits of using success criteria: it makes it much easier to give feedback. You gain a lot of efficiency. You don't need to spend heaps of time analyzing what was wrong with their work or what they could have done better, but all you need to do is ask, have they met this success criteria? Have they met this success criteria? And so on. And you only need to create success criteria for a topic once. Of course, you can always go back, edit and tweak them and improve them, but mostly the direction for the topic and the clarity of what you're expecting will stay the same. It also improves student perception of our feedback as well. Hattie found that without the where to next statement in feedback, students actually perceived that they didn't get any feedback at all. So these success criteria really give them the next steps and make it clear that there is something they're aiming for and they recognize it as feedback. So success criteria also helps us to give them manageable next steps, so it hones in on 1 or 2 main things that they need to work on. Like this quote again from author Jeff Anderson: to refrain from compulsively fixing everything at once, which I know is a constant temptation because we see opportunities everywhere. But of course, it just causes the writer to shrink and learn nothing. So that can also be the problem with annotating students' work, is that they get this overwhelming amount of feedback, which can be perceived as discouraging as well. And it's not even an effective practice, because researcher George Hillix found that teachers who marked every error didn't have an increase in effectiveness compared to teachers who only marked the errors that were relevant to the focus that they had. So basically that means don't correct their spelling if you're focusing on hooking the reader's attention. It only uses more of your time and doesn't increase your effectiveness. So let's save ourselves some time and only give feedback on the relevant work. Success criteria is the key to that. And as mentioned, students can self-assess against success criteria. So it begins to create more independence, puts more of the learning in their hands. And one massive benefit for success criteria is that it promotes a growth mindset. So all of the language around the ladder towards success and the levels that they can achieve is with strategy and effort language, not with ability language, so that they can see that strategy and effort and tactics are the modes that pay off and not whether they were born with certain abilities. So a really helpful video to show kids that models that is called Austin's Butterfly. There's a link in the description. It really shows how kids can take on specific feedback that is not tied to their self-esteem or their ego, but is really aimed at their effort and strategy. So some of the components that make success criteria effective. Obviously, it must be linked to the learning goal. And that seems obvious, but it can be an early warning flag for us if we've set out designing certain activities or certain success criteria, and we realize down the track that they actually don't achieve the overall goal we were going for. Obviously, they need to be easy to understand as well, not in teacher language, but in kid-friendly language. It's our job to translate the curriculum into language that kids can understand and really get a handle on. And it must focus on the specific features of work that will be assessed. So here's an example of success criteria that does all of those things. It's linked to the learning goal, it's easy to understand, and it's aimed specifically at what is being assessed. So here are some helpful background steps to prepare for writing success criteria. To consult the curriculum for the expected standard. The Australian curriculum is pretty much written in very success criteria friendly language, so it's quite easy to adapt. You can look at the descriptors, at the standards and examples. They also have assessment examples too. So this example from Year 3 literacy is pretty much made for success criteria. It's already got verbs at the start and really tangible and specific language. And the achievement standard for Year 10 geography is very helpful in guiding what success looks like. We don't need to come up with it ourselves, but we can tweak what is already there to our context and students' needs. So from there we would start to craft our learning goal. What do we want the kids to know, understand, or do? For example, to use effective informative or narrative or persuasive techniques in writing, to convert between fractions, percentages, and decimals, and to describe how light travels and changes would all be examples of learning goals. You would also make writing the learning goal and success criteria an integrated part of your planning process and routine when you sit down with your buddy teacher or your year level, planning where the unit is going to go, and then referring back to those when you are moderating for assessments. So having done all of those things, some of the steps that I found helpful to building success criteria. Co-constructing success criteria with students can be very powerful because they are forced to analyze and to identify what they think should be part of a high quality piece of work. They're forced to wrestle with the concept and break it down into manageable steps, which helps them more effectively internalize the process. But of course, it is helpful to have a few success criteria ready to go so you can guide students towards the goals that you know would be beneficial for them. I find it manageable to use 4 success criteria, and I think of them as 2 surface level and 2 deep, or 2 surface level, 1 deep, and 1 transfer, which I'll explain in a sec. But of course, you could have more with older students. And these are the way that I think of the levels of those success criteria. The first is to know and remember, so it's very basic introductory knowledge. Then to use or practice as their understanding develops, to analyze or critique as they get more to grips with the material, and to apply and connect when they really have a grasp on it and they're able to manipulate and see connections and transfer their information into other domains. Then for each of those levels, here are some of the verbs that I've found helpful to prompt and to be a resource when I'm trying to craft the success criteria statements. So for the surface level, the first surface level, I usually phrase these as, in the past I've phrased them as I can, but I found that maybe psychologically the students then think they already can do those things and they lay claim to them when perhaps there's a bit more work to do. So I think I'll start using I will be successful if I can. So then it implies that there's still work to be done. And these are some of those verbs that I use as prompts to start. So a student will be able to be successful if they can identify, draw, summarize, define, match. These are all very surface level understanding demonstrations. And so for the second level of surface, going a little bit deeper, verbs like use, classify, distinguish between, summarize, justify, organize. So they're starting to go a little bit deeper in their understanding and use the information. and some prompts getting into the deep levels where students will hopefully be able to predict, argue, generalize, evaluate, and critique. So they're then starting to not only be familiar with the content, but start to engage with it. And lastly, some verbs to write success criteria for the deepest level of understanding, able to be transferred to other topics and areas. Things like apply, design, analogize, create an analogy for, synthesize, construct, develop. So that's when the knowledge really starts to expand and be applicable into other domains that they make connections with. Here are some examples to ground that kind of abstract explanation. So for writing, say in the younger year levels, I'll be successful if I can plan. That's a simple verb to start with the surface level criteria, surface 1. Surface 2, include problems for characters to overcome. Deep, picture and describe details that happen in each part of the story. And then maybe for more advanced writers, create an unexpected solution to the problem. So then you have, from most basic to more sophisticated, some verbs to prompt the students and refer them back to, so that they know what success looks like and also can see a kind of ladder of achievement as they go from surface to deeper knowledge. And another example from literacy, something like a character analysis, being successful if they can identify the key characters. Sometimes you start with surface level success criteria that are for the students who we know are not going to be able to achieve as deep an understanding as some of the more advanced students. So success criteria also helps to have something for them to be able to feel some success. After that, going on to describe the character, compare characters within the text, something like a Venn diagram might be helpful, and infer what a character is like from their words and actions using evidence from the text, so something a more advanced reader might be able to do. And last example in maths, being successful if they can order fractions by their denominators, match, describe, and convert. So going surface, surface 2, deep, and transfer. And for this topic, I had success criteria that matched with pre- and post-teaching questions, so that by asking a student a question or having them submit it in a form or a pre-assessment, I could see which level they were at. So for example, the ordering fractions by their denominators, I had a question like, which fraction is smallest? A half, 4/10, 1/6, or 3/7. So then if they got that right, I knew they knew that the denominator was the most important part of ordering fractions. And for the match fractions success criteria, I had the question, which decimal matches with the fraction 1/4. Obviously, if they don't know that, then they're not ready to work at that level. So here's how we can put success criteria to work and make it super effective and time-saving in our classroom. Displays around the room are also our second teacher. So having these success criteria on display, and as you'll see in these examples with some student work and different features, that will really amplify their effect. Starting with the lower end of the school, using something like stamps, colored stamps in particular that correspond with success criteria that you have on display, so that as you're roaming, it's very easy to stamp or just use a colored pen as well to show the child where in their work they have achieved that success criteria. Just takes a few seconds. For example, when they are writing an investigation report, if you had a purple stamp, it means you listed all the materials in your experiment. If you had a blue stamp, it means you listed all of the steps in the procedure. If you have a green stamp, it means that you discuss the results. And then the child knows exactly which success criteria they have achieved, and they can see which one they haven't achieved yet, so they can start to work on that and even get some advice from people around them. Here's an example from the younger year levels with colors corresponding to the achievement in their work. And I like that this one also has worked examples, which are extra helpful for kids. I probably might steer away from the red being the lowest success criteria color and making it into something else. And then also you wouldn't celebrate just the number of stamps that someone gets, but the progress. If someone has gone from one color and been able to add a second or a third color to their work, it means they've really made progress, and that's what can be celebrated. And another way to use colors again, you can use colored stamps or just colored pens. You can save yourself some breath and or writing time, so that if you put a specific color on a specific part of their work, they know which thing they have to work on, and they can refer to the success criteria that match those colors on your display. This is a slight tangent, but it has some value. You can create feedback keys that students get familiar with. You can have them stick it somewhere in their books, maybe at the back or even on the front like this example has. The pieces of feedback themselves in this example I think are a bit vague, so they themselves could include some examples or have some more specificity. But most importantly for this practice, students have to find and identify the errors themselves, and they explain it to you. So the responsibility, the work, and the effort is all put back on the student where it belongs, rather than on us trying to will them to apply our feedback. This is similar for older students, a more open-ended version. You can have a read of the descriptions and the steps on this slide. I might change this by having different color pens as before to match the success criteria on display, just so the students have a little bit more direction. Because as one of the steps says, if their work is wrong, put a dot on their paper. There's always something they can improve, so everyone would have dots. Whereas I feel like different colors would direct them towards specific steps they need to take. Continuing to put our success criteria to work, we can use simple checklists as well. A simple version of this is to have a checklist ready, glue it into their books, either beforehand or they can do it themselves. And as you roam around the room, all you need to do is tick on their checklist what you see in their work. They're getting immediate specific feedback with about 1 second of effort from you. This is more of a strategy for primary students, but it could be adapted to secondary students as well in principle. And a rubric is essentially a leveled success criteria checklist. So that could be part of your conferencing with students in class. This pre-flight checklist we've seen before. As you roam, you just tick each thing that you're seeing from a student. And another younger example for working on editing and text conventions. And another example for writing conventions. So it will really save us a lot of time if we have the success criteria planned out in specific student-friendly language. When it's stuck in their books and we're roaming around, a quick tick and they have high-quality feedback right then. I've found peer feedback meters to be valuable too. All of the previous checklists in the examples before could be used by peers as well. And this is a step towards cooperative teams where students are giving each other feedback, and it frees you up as the teacher to be able to spend more time with the kids who need more attention. While peers are giving each other feedback with these meters, you can spend time with those kids. Here's a feedback meter I've used in the past when teaching the planning stage of writing. So there would be 3 of these feedback meter boxes on one A4 sheet. Each person would glue it in their book just at the top so that it sits over their writing, so they can roll it back to see the writing underneath. They would pass it to 3 people who would take one of these boxes each, and they would shade for each row and each criteria, which I'd have explanations and examples for up on display. They would shade the number of boxes corresponding with how much they think they achieved that criteria. So you might be able to see there's about 5 boxes there, and they would shade it like a physical meter to give feedback to their peers about how much success they'd achieved for that criteria. Perhaps my favorite of the success criteria tools is a progress chart, which helps the kids to learn to self-evaluate. This was the progress chart that I would use for maths. It would have different success criteria and a unicorn for each level. So we would call them sipping, smiling, charging, flying, and I think blitzing was the last one. So students would complete a pre-test to see which level they were. Just like before when I talked about having a pre-teaching question matched to each success criteria, that's what I would use here. So then what they would know is if they can answer that question correctly or that problem correctly, they could then start work at the level above that, at the deeper level of understanding. So then they didn't need to complete the basic work at the surface level, but they could go on with work that actually challenged them. When that was finished, they would do a checkpoint question, or I would scan their work to see if they were ready to level up, and then they would record all of those steps in this progress chart. So after they finished the pre-teaching questions, they would be able to say what they could do. They would also write I want to in that orange column on the right, and that would be the next step, the next success criteria that they were working on. So they had a very manageable, achievable target that was proximal. It was just the next step in their development. And that would repeat, and they would level up through the week so that by the end of the week I could ask who made progress this week, and they could all look at their progress chart and see that they had made a ton of progress. And this was with the lower stream in maths. Kids who really hated maths, they would come in and actually tell me I hate maths at the start of the year. But after each week, cumulatively, as they would see the progress that they were making, I would hear in parent-teacher interviews later in the year that maths had become their favorite subject. They could see the progress they were making. They knew how many gains they were making in their learning. They could record all of this and keep it in a display folder so they could see all the progress they'd made through all of these topics. It was a really, really powerful tool. And the last tool for putting success criteria to work is a bump it up wall, also called a waggle wall sometimes. What a good one looks like, a waggle wall. And kids self-evaluating their work is much easier if you have one of these. Basically, it's a display with an example or a past student example of what success looks like. It can also form part of the co-constructing step when you're writing success criteria, so that kids really break down and analyze the work and what success looks like. And you can keep and reuse the bump it up wall for every time that you use this topic. This one I like because it gives students very tangible next steps, and it's quite student friendly and fun. I like the annotated student work in this example, so that past student work or sample work is annotated with the success criteria in practice, and a more in-depth example for secondary students. And all of these help to build a growth mindset, as I talked about before. They are filled with the steps and criteria for success as strategy and effort, not ability. As author and teacher trainer Gershon says, students operating under a growth mindset are more likely to see feedback as helpful. Students, however, with a fixed mindset will see it as a threat, and they're less likely to believe it can contribute to their progress too. So a growth mindset prompted and promoted by using success criteria will make our feedback that much more effective and powerful. So that's it. Thanks for tuning in for so long. Hopefully looking at success criteria can help us to see that the feedback process affects all of our thinking and planning. It's not just something we give tacked on at the end of the unit, but it informs everything from the very start of the unit, planning the assessment and the learning goal, and the success criteria to get to that goal, and then all along the way giving students feedback about how they're going against those criteria. It means that feedback isn't separate from teaching, it is the teaching. It really is the nuts and bolts and the core of what we do. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you soon. Bye. So today we're talking about learning goals and success criteria, and success steps and success. So some of the benefits of using success and the leveled